He has sold 3 million books in Sweden only. Now he's back with a new thrilling Alan Banks story, Watching the Dark, I mörkrets skugga. Please welcome one of Britain's most successful crime writers, Peter Robinson. Hi. Thank you. Please. I just told Peter that Caitlin Moran kissed me on the mouth in Gothenburg.
I wasn't allowed to do that.
I got one here. Hi, Peter.
Hello.
Welcome. We are thrilled to have you here tonight, and welcome back to Sweden. You've been here once before, right?
To the Gothenburg Book Fair, yes, a few years ago.
But it's your first time in Stockholm?
It's my first time in Stockholm. I've only been here a few hours.
And what's your first picture?
Well, it looks like an interesting place. It's going to be fun.
Let's see. You know, we love crime writing, British crime writing in Sweden. We read a lot of it, and your Inspector Banks is a new favorite of mine. I'm a little bit late in. I think there's a lot of Banks fans here. Or do we have any Banks fans? Yes.
Hello.
You have sold over 3 million books in Sweden so far and won a lot of prizes. How did you invent your Inspector Banks?
Well, I just moved to Canada from Yorkshire at the time, and I was feeling very homesick. And I knew I wanted to write a detective story. And it made sense to set it in Yorkshire because that would be a way that writing about it from a distance, I could make myself feel more at home. So I took a detective and gave him a partner and just sort of put them in the Yorkshire countryside and said, go to it, start solving crimes. And, he did.
He's been doing that for a while now.
He's been doing it for a long time, I mean, yeah.
But one of the secrets of a good crime novel is that you really like to hang out with the main character, with the inspector in this case. Can you describe Banks a little bit more? What's his strengths and weaknesses?
Well, I mean, he can be a bit mean-spirited, a bit short-tempered, but on the whole, he's a very easygoing, very everyman sort of person. And I think that, it always seems that women would like to perhaps spend time with him. And I think he would be an interesting guy to go for a drink with, or a few drinks, actually. Yeah. He's got a lot of interesting conversation beyond the cases that he works on. So he's interested in music, and, he reads quite well. But he's not an intellectual or anything. He's a very everyman sort of person that most readers, I think, can relate to very easily.
He likes music?
He loves music, and I have to say that a lot of the music that Banks listens to is music I like. It would be really hard to write enthusiastically about music I don't like. So I gave him my own musical tastes.
For example, what's your favorite?
Well, I mean, it's very varied, and that was another thing. I didn't want him to be fixated on cool jazz or Wagner's operas or something like that. So I gave him a wide range of tastes. Chamber music, Schubert, Beethoven, 60s rock and roll, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, that kind of stuff. And also vocal music, sort of folk song. And so it depends on his mood. He'll often sit there in the evening and have a glass of wine and listen to an interesting piece of music, think over the events of the case and, what's happening in general. And they make for nice little scenes to write.
You went to writing school in Canada with one of the real masters, Joyce Carol Oates, right?
Yeah.
Way back, I mean. Tell us about that. What did you learn from her?
I was writing poetry at that time, and it was very strange because I went from Leeds University to University of Windsor, Ontario, and what you had to do was send in some samples of your work to be accepted into the creative writing school, and I was turned down. They said, you can't come and do creative writing. You can do an English Master's of Arts degree, but not creative writing. So I said, okay, I wanted to go anyway, so I went there. And after I'd been there about a month, I gave a poetry reading with some other people on campus, And Joyce came up to me afterwards and said, "Why aren't you in creative writing?" I said, "You rejected me."
Really?
Thank you. And she said, "Well, you didn't show me those poems." And I said, "No, these are poems I've written since I've been in Canada." She said, "Well, it's not too late. Come and see me tomorrow." So I did.
And why did you end up writing crime novels?
I sort of wrote myself into a corner with the poetry. And I was getting interested in formal poetry and poetry that was a lot to do with place and narrative. And I was starting to read a lot of detective novels. So to me, it seemed like a very natural movement, to start telling longer prose stories with quite a lot of description, of Yorkshire and things like that. So it wasn't such an odd change for me. I mean, it moved quite naturally.
What crime writers do you read yourself when you have a quiet evening?
Well, I mean, I look back to the ones who first inspired me, and they were Maigret novels, Georges Simenon, Raymond Chandler. And as much as those writers, Maj Chauvel and Père Vallou, excuse my pronunciation, I think you know who I mean, who, were terrific writers, wrote 10 novels, showing changes in sort of Swedish society in about 10 years. And I read all of them. They were very hard to get back then when I first started. But, it was people like Chandler, Chauvel and Vallou and Simenon, very different writers who made me realize that there was didn't have to be anything formulaic about crime writing. They didn't all have to be the same. They didn't have to be overly reliant on plot and on somebody's will and, an inheritance. And, they could really deal with what was happening in the world and what was happening in people's minds. So it seemed to me to be a great place to go.
I feel very relaxed and safe when I read your books. I mean, you know what you're doing.
Well, if you're around banks, though, anything could happen.
Yes, it could. In this new book, another inspector is found murdered, and Banks has to investigate his own colleagues. Can you tell us a little bit more about I mörkrets skugga? Watching the Dark.
Watching the Dark is the title of a Richard Thompson song, and I also used it as a name for a column in an Estonian newspaper because part of the book is set in Tallinn. When a policeman's killed, everybody starts to get suspicious, because was he corrupt? Was he into something really bad? So, of course, what happens is that while Banks is investigating the murder, somebody is investigating the dead policeman to find out whether he was corrupt. And it gets very complicated. And it turns out to be connected with the disappearance of a young girl at one of the... Do you know these English hen parties and stag parties? They go to places like Dublin, Amsterdam, Prague, get very drunk, forget where they are. And it just seemed to me that in one of these parties, with a lot of girls, young girls getting very drunk in a foreign city, someone could easily disappear. And so that's what the story goes back to. And it was interesting to do, especially to write about a foreign city that I just visited for a week but didn't know very well.
Did you have a bachelor's party when you married Sheila, your wife? Is here?
We were very civilized. We went to a restaurant, an Italian restaurant, and drank wine and ate spaghetti.
As I said, I feel safe with you. How do you do research? Do you have any real policemen that help you with the facts? I
do, yes. I know a number of police officers, and we either meet up or often use email these days. But the way I prefer to do it is write the book, because I don't really plan it all out. I'd get it going with a place and a body in that place, and then I start thinking about who it was, how it might have got there. And when I get to the end of the book, I've got some idea of what I need to know. So that's when I email my police friends and said, how would you do this and how would you do that? But I'm certainly more interested in how could it go wrong or how could it be interesting than what would the procedure be. So I generally say, okay, that's fine. You know, how could this really go wrong? Like the beginning of Bad Boy, which was 2 or 3 books ago, with the simple, you know, taking possession of a handgun. And I got all the procedure of how they do it, how they would do it, and I said, okay, how's this going to really screw up and be really bad? And one of my police friends said, well, I suppose if we knocked and nobody answered the door, it's a good start.
Yeah.
You know?
Can you describe a normal or a typical writing day?
Oh, well, yeah. Usually I get up about 5 in the morning and take the dog for a walk. And no, that's rubbish. I once years ago read a book about, you know, being a writer when I was very young, and it always seemed to stress getting up early in the morning, and I'm not a morning person, so I don't do that. Usually I get started between 8 and 9 and work until between 3 and 4 with a short break for lunch. Longer perhaps if I'm editing or you know, correcting manuscript. But really I think about 6 hours is as much as you can do if you're just making it up from scratch. The problem is, and the most interesting, the most important thing is to get as many days like that in a row as you can. Because then you build up momentum, then you build up a head of steam, and there's nothing like writing for getting ideas about what to write. Don't go away and sit and think about it somewhere else. You know, actually do it, and it will generate ideas. So as many days as you can in a row.
And do you write mostly in Canada or in England?
Well, I write in both places, you know, so it's not a problem for me switching between, you know, writing at the house in Yorkshire or the house in Canada. The problem for me is that I do find it difficult to write in hotels and on planes, and you know, I mean, I know some writers who do that all the time. I was interviewing Alexander McCall Smith in Toronto the other night, and he'd just written a chapter on the plane from Chicago. I was envious. I wish I could do that, but you know, I can't.
And I interviewed Dean Koontz. Do you know him?
Oh, yes,
the American
yeah.
guy? I interviewed him a few months ago. It's coming in the next issue of Books and Dreams, my magazine. And he actually goes up 5:30 in the morning and walk the dog.
He does, yeah. That's maybe where I got it from. Yeah.
But why do you divide your time between Canada and England?
Well, we're residents of Canada, so I think we spend more than 6 months a year there, which is a requirement to do that. We spend probably about 3 or 4 months in England, and come maybe twice a year for a couple of months in the spring, and often in late summer, or like this year we're going to be here over in England until mid-January. We're here for Christmas and New Year's, but that's sort of unusual. You know, there's no set routine, so we just come when we can. And I always go over there for the book tour, which is usually in August. Mostly they publish a book a year, as you do here. And it's always around the beginning of August, so I'll come then and do 2 weeks of touring.
Your books take place in a fictional northern English town called East Vale. Can you describe this place and what it means to you?
Yeah, East Vale was very much based on English Yorkshire Dales market towns like Ripon and Richmond. And as we happen to live in Richmond when we're in England, so I think it's getting a bit closer to Richmond as time goes on. It's getting more obviously so, but it has a central market square, cobbled market square, with a church in the middle and a market cross. Richmond has an obelisk, but East Vale has a cross. And around the square are the various pubs, shops, and the police station, and several roads radiate off. And I made it bigger than any of the towns there, just so that I could get more crime. And, for more crime, you need more people. It seemed like a good equation.
Crime writing is, as I said, a huge interest among readers of the world. What is your analysis? I mean, what does it say about the world that we love to read about murders, blood, and police investigations?
I don't think it necessarily says anything particularly dark or gruesome. I think if you look at crime fiction, it is among the best written fiction today, and it is in a lot of ways the most satisfying because it really is concerned with telling a story. It may seem formulaic, but I don't think there's anything really formulaic about a beginning, a middle, and an end. They can take various forms, and there is crime fiction in which the killer gets away. There's crime fiction in which the murderer is the hero, the talented Mr. Ripley, the Patricia Highsmith books, for example. Terrific crime novels. But, you know, they tell really good stories, and they're very well written. And they also give you some insight into what's going on in society and in human psychology and in specific countries. I mean, Scandinavian crime fiction is incredibly popular outside Scandinavia now. I think, you know, people are finding a lot about the way you live. Maybe you don't like that, but they are.
Which are your favorites when it comes to Scandinavian crime writers?
Well, I certainly was a big Henning Mankell fan. I like Håkan Nesser, Camilla Lackberg. I'm not good at the names.
You're doing good.
I met in Ottawa a couple of weeks ago an interesting writer whose first name was, I think, Jon Lier Horst. He's Norwegian. I think it's Jon Lier Horst. Okay. And I'd read his first book, and he'd got his second book out in English. So we had a nice chat. So I'm always looking for new things too.
Many of your readers and of the crime writing readers, they dream about becoming an author themselves. What is your advice to people who likes to start to write?
Well, I think what you really need to do is stay at it. That's the main thing. Keep doing it. Don't let criticism put you off easily. Develop a thick skin. And I think I've taught a lot of writing classes, and I've come across a lot of people with talent, but they've given up. And the thing is, if you have the talent, you have to use it. So you keep on using it, and you become professional enough to know that if you have a bad day, it's a bad day. Everybody has a bad day. But, some people will try and convince themselves that they've got writer's block. If they have a bad day, that's it, I can't write anymore. Well, go back the next day and see how you do. And if that doesn't work out, go and get drunk and go back the day after and see how you do. You don't stop. If you really want to be successful as a writer, you do not stop.
In England, your latest Banks novel, Children of the Revolution, just came out. And we're definitely going to follow you and your Inspector Banks. I'm sure about that. Thank you so much, Peter, for coming here. And don't miss to get Peter's new book signed afterwards also. Okay. Thank you.